No, so since you have raised this important point, let me ask you the question on X, the former Twitter platform, and the power of podcasts and the Rogans and others who today command millions of viewership. So how difficult from a media perspective is it engaging with a leadership or a presidency like Trump? Are you guys resetting your organization to be in many ways more agile and more nimble to deal with someone like him?
Time had the opportunity to sit down with Joe Biden this year too, which very few people did. But this is an administration that likes talking to the press, that believes in having conversations and exchanges, that is in fact operates in a very open way. So I would say judge them by their actions and not their words. Are they spending time? Are they giving briefings? Are they giving information? Obviously the drama of the first presidency was a major focus for the press, but I think it's important while certainly there are legal issues and certainly there are threats against free speech in America and certainly the president attacks the press, he also really loves the media. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
In fact, the vice president-elect at that time was, before the elections, was making it a point to actually go to those big legacy media houses that were considered to be not necessarily favorable. Patrick, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two different questions you're asking, right? One is the extent to which the administration cooperates actively with the press and observes the norms. And the answer is it will to a degree, but based on the behavior last time, I think it will be, in some respects, quite hostile, and we've already seen media owners of various flavors try to curry favor with the administration, which sends you quite a strong signal about what they expect to happen. The other question is what extent the media gives an accurate guide to what's happening in America. And I think, again, we've had a pretty disappointing election campaign in that respect. The polling system, which is often run by media companies, has proven again to be really quite inaccurate. And the base assumption was that Biden was fit enough to be elected. That turned out to be wrong, and I think that's a huge failing on the part of the media, really, the establishment media. And then also that it's then bigged up Kamala Harris, which proved to be a bad decision, and then again didn't really anticipate Trump. So I think the legacy media has a big problem, and it's coming at a time when the disruption of the business model rumbles on for the big media houses. Does that mean I'm pessimistic about free speech and truth in America? Not really, because it's the largest, most vibrant, most riotous arena for speech and ideas in the world too. And I think it's possible from that to kind of have a kernel of truth that still comes out. The one game changer I do think is the marriage of Musk and Trump, or at least maybe marriage is the wrong word, or maybe there'll be a divorce within a few weeks. But I think that is very important, and Zuckerberg's decision effectively to suspend these constraints and possibly the banning of TikTok, or as some kind of deal perhaps that creates an entity that's beholden to Trump in some way. And I think they will be using that media platform much, much more aggressively to try and influence public opinion in the US. But as I mentioned before,
also overseas.
Also overseas, and obviously places which don't have free media, China, Iran, Russia, for example, are largely immune from this. So paradoxically, it's actually the allies and democracies where the Trumpian distortion of...
If you were in Berlin, you would complain about something like this, for example.
Well, in fact, Chancellor Scholz already has. Yeah.
Correct. Meena.
But I would say it's also happening at a time when deep fakes have become much cheaper to produce and are proliferating. So actually, independent of how the Trump administration is dealing with the media, there's going to be increased confusion, and the speed of fake news traveling, whether they feed into that or not, is really a challenge, and it's challenging media globally, not just, of course, the US. So it could, in some ways, actually help the legacy media, where people will come back to them to verify, did Trump actually say this? What would happen? It's incredible to see how Donald Trump has used direct access to audiences by using his own platform, or of course now with Musk and Twitter, but there will still be messaging. And I think we found that actually with the Trump administration, they do want to talk to the media, and they do go to the legacy media, actually much more than we found with the Biden administration.
So the role of the editor is perhaps even more pronounced today, because they have to make sense of all the noise that is available out there.
A panel of editors decides the only answer.
That's right, is that it is. That's right.
Look, I think it would be fair to discuss 3 international issues, since this is a global conference we are sitting at. Let's start with the most obvious one, the ceasefire in the Middle East. And Meena, I'll start with you, and I want both of your takes on how do you see this pan out, considering that Trump is not going to necessarily enjoy the same ability to move the capital to Jerusalem and forget about a geographical entity called Palestine. It is now real as part of any deal. And how does he navigate that?
So the fact that 75% of the member states of the UN today recognize the existence of a Palestinian state is, of course, a game changer compared to where we were previously. I think also in the Middle East, officials throughout the Middle East realize that this is an issue that really does need some sort of solution. And again, the fact that the ceasefire was put in place just before the inauguration of Donald Trump shows that they realize this is not something that they want hanging over their heads from day one, but it is a long road ahead. And to your point about being optimistic or pessimistic, absolutely, there's still so much that can go wrong. There's a ceasefire in Lebanon, there's a ceasefire in Gaza, and at any point that can go. And we still have, of course, terrible situation in Yemen. And much more to go. But I think for the Trump administration, there is a sense of how powerful actually America can be when it chooses to use that power. And the one thing that is clear is the US remains the most important superpower. They've shown that in the Middle East. American economy has knock-on effects globally, but again, with the Middle East. So I think actually geographically and the geographic reach of the US is much greater, with the difference that now, of course, the Afghanistan question is closed. And even though it was Donald Trump who said we need to withdraw, the shambolic withdrawal that happened from Afghanistan is really on the shoulders of the Biden administration, even if they try to shift blame. So I think that puts them in a position where they realize that they can move the needle, that there is interest in this in the Middle East region, but also in Europe. And the fact that you have now a coalition between Norway and Saudi Arabia and others, European and Arab countries, trying to drive a two-state solution, that in some way can help the US not have to deal with the details and nitty-gritty, but actually own a deal and be able to say, we're able to drive this deal. So it's an important moment. And again, the dynamics with Iran, this can't be seen as separate from Iran. With what's happening in Syria and Lebanon, and the fact that you actually, the grip of Hezbollah and the grip of Iran in both Syria and Lebanon is something that Trump will want to champion. Let's not forget that his daughter's father-in-law is important Lebanese player now in this, and he can actually influence some of the dynamics. And again, I think that shows still the U.S. has incredible power over some of these dynamics.
I want to just jump in here. What's interesting, we asked President Trump just the week of Thanksgiving, we went down to visit him about how he thinks about Ukraine, how he thinks about the ceasefire. And as perhaps you could expect, there was a level of confidence when it comes to the Middle East. He said, oh, that's very easy. It's very easy. Ukraine's a little harder, but the Middle East is very easy. And so there is a kind of sense of comfort and confidence. It may be completely misplaced, but there is a real sense of, well, we can take care of that problem. And it was interesting over the course of a few weeks, there were developments that seemed to come in the administration's favor, at least the developments that they were supporting And of course, he has promised that he'll solve the Ukraine-Russia war tomorrow. So I think that we talk about the Trump effect, there are limits to it. And so we can see in places where it has proved effective, or at least where the administration believe it's proving effective. And then there are other places where...
But Sam, if you were to be sitting in Europe today, and certainly if you were to be Zelensky...
I think we are.
That's right.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're in Planet Davos. We're not in Europe.
Okay, all right.
Planet Davos.
So in Europe today, and certainly in Central Eastern Europe,
Yes.
There is a realization that you are looking at a bad deal.
I think what's interesting, one of our reporters who's great on Ukraine, Simon Schuster, talked to someone close to Zelensky at the end of the Biden administration and said, how do you assess the Biden administration's legacy when it comes to Ukraine? And the answer was, we don't know. History will tell. Now, America spent $183 billion on Ukraine. I do not anticipate that President Trump is going to spend the same amount supporting Ukraine. And so the fact that there's a sense of suspicion and discomfort with how the Biden administration handled Ukraine really makes me concerned about what America's place is going to be in that conflict going forward.
Patrick.
Yeah, so first of all, on the Middle East, I mean, I think there's no doubt that Trump has made things better. As you said, he seems to have been instrumental in getting the ceasefire. That doesn't mean one should be optimistic. And the reason is that what's been agreed, the first stage of the ceasefire, as you know, really doesn't answer any of the major questions. And it doesn't answer the question of, is it acceptable to Western powers or even the Gulf states to have Hamas still in control of Gaza? And that's the signal they're trying to send in the last few days, that they are in control. It doesn't settle the crucial question for Israel of whether it retains a right to intervene militarily in Gaza under certain circumstances. And of course, it doesn't really address the fundamental and possibly irreconcilable set of views of both sides around a two-state solution. And bear in mind, at the moment, we have a government in Israel for now that is implacably opposed to that. So, the Trumpian vision of essentially some kind of cessation of violence between the Israelis and Palestinians, an alliance between Israel, America, and Saudi, and then using that to kind of impose conditions or intimidate or reduce the power of Iran is a compelling vision for the Middle East. It's just that I don't think we've really made a giant step towards it. On Ukraine, the picture, I think, is Russia continuing to cause enormous attritional damage to Ukraine, both in terms of sort of incremental terrain gains and casualties, and imposing acute strains on Ukraine's political system, including the legitimacy of Zelensky. And obviously, we all hope that President Trump does manage to negotiate some kind of deal that's on favorable terms to Ukraine. It's hard to see the leverage he has over Russia. I think possibly the only thing the US could do is try and impose much more draconian oil sanctions on Russia. But because of Trump's interest in the stock market and economy and inflation and so on, that may be something they're reluctant to. They could consider inducements for President Putin, release them from sanctions, give the foreign exchange reserves money back, and so on. But that would point more towards, I would say, a short-term deal that gets some kind of ceasefire and fighting to stop, but doesn't really solve the fundamental problems in the long run. And aren't those two situations really rather similar?